Thank you, Charles. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be talking or hearing about the possible improvement in the use of the ground model approach and how it can help in reducing the costs of developing offshore wind. And it follows on from some of the points that Brianna's just made. I'm going to breeze through a lot of slides in the next 15 minutes, and I'm hopefully going to be slightly controversial if there are members of the site investigation community in the audience who can ask me questions at the end. So what is a ground model and how can it help us? What sort of model do we need to build and how should we build it? And then how do we use it to save us cost? And however, what factors are mitigating against us getting the most out of this approach? So first off, some basics, and I apologize to some of the engineers in the audience, but the ground model is a model because we don't know the real conditions at all points across our wind farm site. And it's a representation of the seabed and the water column as well, and the relevant shallow geology, and I emphasize the word relevant. So the objective of using this ground model is to manage our risks of our site at the lowest cost. So, and this is a statement from a document which I'll refer to on a few occasions during the talk. It's the new SUT Offshore Site Investigation and Geotechnics Group guidance notes for the planning and execution of geophysical and geotechnical ground investigations for offshore renewable energy developments. So that's the full title. It's about to be published. It's taken along several years to get together with representatives from across the industry. So, and this is a statement from it. The level of risk is inversely proportional to the level of knowledge. And ideally, the risk assigned to any development will decrease with increased knowledge of the development area prior to the design being finalized and construction commencing. So this is a typical multi-phase process that the development of our wind farm will go through. And so we have a first phase of gate one, which is the concept selection phase, then go through front-end engineering design or feed, and then we eventually get to detailed design. And these three phases, these should enable us to reduce the cost uncertainty involved in building this wind farm. You can see this combined curve of plus or minus cost based against our baseline cost should shrink as we go through this process. So effectively what we're doing is we're reducing our risks and increasing our knowledge through that period of time. Now if we look at the cost here, what we have is we're spending money to learn about the site and therefore reducing our risk. Now the challenge to the industry is, are we down at this level where we're spending a lot of money for marginal gains of risk reduction at the end here? Or are we indeed still delivering good value by reducing risk on a good cost-benefit approach? So what do we have to do to make this ground model work for us? We need to build the right kind of model that answers just the questions we need answering at the time we need them answered. We're not looking to do a research project, as it says here. The danger with having a lot of powerful equipment and powerful tools out there to gather huge amounts of information. This is all very interesting, but is it necessary? We need to involve all the data users to define and continually redefine the questions as we go through the process, because whilst we're doing this site investigation, the wind farm development engineers will be choosing their equipment, wind turbines, foundation types, etc., and the evolution of new technology into the market will change that situation as we go. So we need to keep pace with this and be prepared to change our plans as we go along. And we need to then challenge the guys building these models. Do we really need to know that fact, and do we really need to know it now? So we've been building ground models for doing this kind of work onshore for many years, and the tools, the software and the equipment and the techniques and the methods have all been established. But it's very much more easy to ground truth your investigation of the soils, etc., on an onshore site than it is offshore. And we also have the big issue of the scale. So we have been offshore, obviously, for oil and gas, and we again have the benefit that we're generally talking about a fairly small area of development that we're trying to find out about in order to install a structure. And also we have generally a much less stringent funding issue if we are looking to exploit a large reservoir of oil and gas. So again, comparing our wind industry facts with the oil and gas facts, then In Senergy, we do a lot of work for both sectors, and we would work typically for an oil and gas development with a 2 kilometre by 2 kilometre site, which is one of these wee squares here. And in the offshore, in the East Anglia site, this is the East Anglia licensed area, that would equate to 1,500 of such sites. So, that is the relative scale of problem we're having to deal with here. And just to sort of bring it close to home here, if this is a map of Aberdeen, as you can see, and this is the equivalent of a first phase or single phase part of a round 3 wind farm development, about 450 square kilometres. Now, how many boreholes and how much survey work would the engineers who built Aberdeen have undertaken before they were prepared to put up an office block, etc., and all the houses and the buildings, etc., in Aberdeen? Now, there will be thousands of investigations undertaken, and we're trying to find out about our vast seabed area with as little work as possible. And we're going to do a bunch of remote sensing work and ground truthing work. Now, this is the process that the guidance notes indicate as the kind of established good practice. That we start with a desk study, we look at what information is available, and we go through this cyclical phase of work to investigate our site to the next step required, and then we go round the loop and do another phase of investigation when we've come and gone through those gates in the process of establishing the final development plan, until we end up with the word sufficient site investigation to build our wind farm. So we're using two techniques. We're using geophysical techniques, which are a remote sensing tool, which needs ground truthing, needs calibration, and that covers very large areas very quickly, and we're calibrating that with geotechnical investigations, which are very precise and gather lots of detailed information, but only about a very small area. So we need to use a combination of both techniques. And these questions that these surveys need to answer will be different at the various stages of the wind farm development. Different for concept selection, different for feed, and different for detailed design. And who are we gathering this information for? We need to advise those guys doing the turbine foundation work, selecting the right foundation types, etc., those doing the substation platform work, the cables, the cables routing, planning, and installation, and then the consenting as well, like all those areas which Brown has just talked about that are in need of cost reduction. And again, then the installation phase, the maintenance phase, the operations planning, all will be needing information from this ground model. So what sort of model would we like to build? Do we actually need? We need an ultimate ground model which provides sufficient information at each stage of the development at the lowest cost and just when it's needed. This is the project timeline that the guidance note shows as an example, and you can see the multi-year, 6 year process that is shown as an example here, and a range of phases of desk study work to start with, right through to the pre-construction final survey work. The blue blobs here represent the offshore field work, and then the red bars represent the onshore work of interpretation and lab testing and so on. So this is a complex, expensive, and multi-phase activity. And this is it in a process flow diagram. And again, we start with our desk study, we get our ground model database together, we do various field work, and we feed information into the ground model, and we go follow this process around with these various iterative phases. So how do we start? Well, we said we'll start with a ground model. We use the existing data that the Hydrographic Office has already got, that the BGS have already got, whoever is the authorities that have gathered data. The oil and gas industry may have been there. There may be a lot of useful data we can use. And we will assemble this typically into a geographical information system, a GIS, and this becomes the hub of the store of our ground model data. And we want to make sure that this data is accessible and shared by all members of our team. Everyone needs to be on the same page as these various parallel processes move forward. And so we are currently developing, implemented in the last 6 months, a web-based GIS tool, which is an example view here. And this enables anyone to come in on their iPad and view the state of play of the ground model. So what are we needing to install? We're going to have a range of constructions for the foundations for wind turbines and for met masts and so on. Various foundation types will be needed to be considered. And then we have to link all that together, obviously, with the cable array. And we have a vast kilometerage of inter-array cables, and then export cables to take the power to shore. And all these things will have demands for information and need to be as part of the ground model design. What's going to affect our development overall? And where we've got our licensed area offshore, we're going to find that it has a population of hazards. And what hazard types will exist on our site? How significant are they to our development? Whereabouts are they situated, and how frequent, how common, how affected are we by each of those particular hazards? Are they going to affect our plans, and are they manageable? And again, the guidance notes give this great shopping list of things you need to look out for that may affect what you're trying to build. So some of them are man-made, some of them are natural seabed features, and other ones are the subsurface features in which we're going to install the foundations of our structures and install our cables. So the big question then is, how much of this cheap remote geophysical survey work, the remote sensing work, can we do? Because we can cover huge acreages very quickly, and how much expensive ground truthing geotechnical data do we need? And we really need to try and do, again, as little as possible to answer the key questions at the lowest cost and as late as possible, so we know we've already got funding in place before we spend that extra pound. Now, this is a phrase we often get, a common phrase within the site investigation industry. We need to know all we can about the site, but do we really need to know all we can? Nowadays, we can find out a heck of a lot of information. Do we really need all that? It's a very big area with overall complex geology, and we can spend a great amount of money and time investigating all those aspects and build a lovely ground model, but is it more of a research project than an essential tool for the development? The reality is, when we've built the wind farm, it will be some structures occupying very small sites, scattered across a very wide area, linked together with thin cables, and we will be using a very small few percent of the seabed in that licensed area that we started with. And so we have to, again, be aware of looking at small-scale maps. If you look at a small-scale map of a wind farm, it will have a cluster of lovely little turbine icons on it, which looks as if they're shoulder to shoulder across the site. You think, we need to know everything about that whole area. In reality, you're building this. So the area of interest for our investigation effectively shrinks as we go through this process, and the amount of resolution and detail we need to find out will increase. So these parallel tracks and these sort of mirror image tracks are what we need to bear in mind. And in reality, because we're going through these particular stages of selecting concepts and doing feed and then going to pre-construction survey, the amount of detail will increase in those kind of steps as well as the area of real interest decreases. Now, what questions do our engineers really need answering? Well, this is my sort of assertion here. Established methods and innate conservatism means that decisions will be reduced to a few basic choices. They'll be choosing one or two or three types of pile. They'll be choosing one or two contractors who are going to install the cables using one or two types of plough. These are the kind of decisions we end up with after all this work we're doing. So at the concept selection phase, they're going to be saying which concepts for our foundations will work here, which will be the cheapest, which will be most suitable. At feed stage, do I use pile type A or type B? And at design stage, do I need so many of those and so many of these, or a different number? Our surveys themselves, what do we actually go and do offshore? Well, the geophysical survey uses a very complicated suite of equipment towed and installed on a survey boat. And it gathers a vast amount of mostly acoustically gathered data, and we can find out a heck of a lot about the seabed and the subseabed using this technique. And we have to choose those right tools to answer the right questions at the right time. In the center here, you can see the string vest survey, the reconnaissance survey, uses a loose grid of data up front to cover a lot of area to tell us what kinds of seabed are out there on our newly acquired license. And when we get to the need for much more high-resolution data, we can choose the right tools to do that job. Now, resolution costs money. If you want to get high-resolution data, you have to use short-range systems, which means you have to do lots of survey lines. And here we can see a nice picture from a very high-resolution side-scan sonar of a bicycle standing on a seabed, and you can see the acoustic shadow of that bicycle, hopefully even at the back, quite clearly. So the question is, high resolution. Well, it's available. It's the newest thing. Let's use it. The contractor says it's the best. Well, the contractor has a slightly A particular reason for telling you that, because it means you'll have to shoot more lines of data and it will give him a bigger revenue project. Now, I'm slightly maybe exaggerating that, but that's a fact of life. Do you really need all that resolution now, or do you really need it on that location? You should use it where and when it's necessary. And this is my analogy of the day here. Nokia has just brought out this probably come out a few months ago, the 1020 with a 41 megapixel camera for a smartphone. Apparently, a top photographic website told me that I need an 8 megapixel image if I want to blow up a picture to 16 inches by 20 inches at full resolution. Now, most people use their smartphones to take pictures in the pub or their pets or whatever and use a 1 megapixel image. So, again, choose the right resolution for the right job.
Richard, can I ask you to wind up, please?
Yeah. So, your geotechnical site investigation, ground truthing. We need to use the right tools again to gather the information we need at the stage we need it. And these are shallow data sets for cable burial and deep data sets for foundation assessment. And then where we space these things out, this is the big question of zonal versus turbine-specific sampling. Here you can see these are the zones of soils we've identified from our geophysics, and we can calibrate those potentially using very few sampling locations. But the regulations in some countries say you've got to do a borehole on every turbine location. So we need to improve the ability to integrate the geophysics and geotechnics on these situations so we can afford to not do a borehole on every turbine. And there is emerging technologies taken from the oil industry which are beginning to show real promise in this area. So here we show the zonal approach, just what you need to calibrate your data set versus the acquiring a borehole on every turbine location, which is probably overkill. Now, the issue here is it fits with conventional contracting. Some contractors will say, I need a borehole at my site. And this is where we need to think about how we're doing our contracting work. So if we do all this better kind of ground modeling, we will get to the stage where we're reducing the cost to reduce that risk to the acceptable level. We'll have spent less money. So just to finish off, what factors, however, might stop us from doing all this? Well, the lateral variability of the seabed and the soil conditions. Some sites are really frustrating and challenging. They have what my colleagues, my staff in the department call interesting geology, which is always bad news for a developer. And then this is, again, a major factor, the synchronism between the engineering decisions. When are these guys going to choose what turbine they're going to install or what foundation they're going to use? Because we've got to go out and do some more survey work. We've got an opportunity to go and do more survey work. We need to synchronize those phases of work. And this issue we talked about, one borehole per turbine, do we really need it? One other question, which is, I don't know if it's been explored this week again, is the unexploded ordnance issue, and that needs high-resolution data. But again, where do you need that data? Where are you actually going to be on the seabed? And we talked about the contracting model. We need to get better dialogue, a better collaborative and partnering between the contracting sector and the developers to say, what data do you really need before you're prepared to go and install that structure? And overall, we end up with fighting against conservatism and trying to get people to take a different appetite to risk. So in the words of the great Obi-Wan Kenobi, or to paraphrase Obi-Wan Kenobi, use the ground model, Luke. So this is just finish off the ground model, the lateral variability problem, and this is where we have to blame the ice age. We would like a soil model like this, where we've got a nice horizon very clearly visible across this piece of seismic data. Here's our seabed, and we know exactly where that will be. And we can say, we drew a borehole here, we'll predict where it is over here. A lot of especially the northern parts of the North Sea and around the coast of the UK, the soils look a bit like this because the ice has pushed all the soils into this horribly complicated vertically. This is a beach in Denmark, but this same kind of soils exist under the North Sea, and it makes it very difficult to make our ground models as cheaply as we'd like. And as I say, the ice is often to blame. So to summarize, we must build a ground model to do this work. We must revise it to capture all and only the information that you need at each stage. Make sure that you're liaising with the engineers continually to enable the appropriate ground model refinement, which is then synchronized with the development decisions. and you make sure you're delivering the right answers at the right stages for the right area. Use the high-res data only where you need to. Make maximum use of this zonal approach, and explore contracting models for construction that better avoid conservatism. Okay, and that's the guidance notes I spoke about. You can get them very shortly off the SUT website, www.sut.org.uk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.